As Sean said, my name is Larkin. I'm from an organisation that I'm not going to repeat the name, but we're an NHS Foundation Trust, and we're affectionately known as RDASH, just the shortened version. And I'm actually from the banking sector. So I was a bank manager for 15 years, and I made a huge leap into the public sector, and I have never ever looked back. I will never go back to the private sector for all the money in the world. And the reason being is that I've become involved quite accidentally in mental health, but it's a subject that I find very, very interesting, and it affects millions of people, and from the small end of the scale through to the serious end. And I'm lucky to work for an organisation that is very influential when it comes to the treatment of mental health, predominantly across the spectrum. So we will treat people from the stress end through to the medium secure units. We've also, to put it into context, we've recently taken on board 1,500 staff for transforming community services. So we have district nurses, school nurses, community matrons, the stop smoking service. So we had to try and look at things differently. So we've recently dropped our mental health name. So talkingsense.org, well, what is it? It's the first NHS e-clinic. And what that means is that patients can receive their appointments from anywhere they can access the internet. And they can choose via an audio, so that's where they will plug in a headset or a handset into their computer. The other option is the chat, which is a bit like BlackBerry Instant Messenger, so it's an instant communication with their therapist. And the other option, which has not been done in the NHS before because of possible security implications, is live face-to-face consultations. Now, what we learned very, very quickly with this is that once we jumped through all the hoops that we needed to jump through, from a governance and a security point of view, which were huge hoops and sometimes extremely high, that we needed to jump through. Once we got all of that, that took a number of years, I would say about 3 years to get there, to tick all the boxes that we needed to tick. We obviously needed to prove the concept. We needed to see if there was a real appetite out there, who would be appropriate, who would want it. And naively, when we started this journey a few years ago, when we undertook the pilot, it took place in North Lincolnshire, and the platform wasn't as great as what we would have liked. It wasn't as flexible, but what we did prove beyond any kind of doubt is that there was a certain appetite. I recently heard Paul Jones, who's the Director of IT at the Department of Health, speak, and he came up with a very, very interesting piece of information, which is around the way that we view technology. And historically, the NHS have always been a little bit behind the times, let's say, and a bit sometimes adverse to change. But what we've tried to do with the build of the e-clinic is bring certainly our trust into the 21st century and try and communicate with our patients as they want us to communicate. So the pilot took place, and what we proved is that over 50% of the patients within North Lincolnshire were appropriate. Now, when I say appropriate, what I mean is that when we've written the governance and the working protocols that support this system, we have been very clear on who is appropriate and who isn't. So we've put guidance in place that's around what's their current level of interaction with the internet. Do they use social media? Can they type? Do they have access to a computer? Basics. But the other that we've been very, very clear about is that it's a clinical judgment, and who is appropriate will be dependent on that individual and the clinician that they are with. So if any risk is presented with that individual, particularly around the mental health arena, then that is a clinical judgment. So although we developed the e-clinic around mental health and the IAP scale, step 2 to 4, we know that it can be utilised in any number of arenas if we stick to the fundamental guidance, which is around clinical judgment and the risk that it might present. Now, the pilot, the 50% of patients, what was really, really interesting is because naively we entered into the pilot thinking this will be great for the 25 to 35-year-olds. And yes, it was, but it was also very good for all of the ages, irrelevant, even the older generation. And I only have to think of my own parents who have changed the way that they communicate with people that they've not been able to have conversations with at the other side of the world, and now using Skype. Well, obviously we can't use Skype within the NHS because it's not secure enough. So that's why we needed to undertake the work that we did. So what we've done is we've built, in conjunction with Microsoft, we've done a lot of work directly with Microsoft, and even tomorrow the guys from Microsoft in Seattle are coming over to visit me to have a look at what we've done. It's never been used like this before, and they are obviously as excited about it as we are. It's very, very simple to use, and anybody who would like a demonstration of it, get in touch. I'll be more than happy to come to your organisation and show you how it works. If I just briefly touch on the basics though, what happens is if we deem them as appropriate, the patient as appropriate, they will be given a code. That code, they can go at their leisure, home, do it at home, or the clinician can do it for them. So they create themselves an account, which is name, address, all the basic stuff, and they will then be presented with a calendar. And on that calendar, it will show you the availability. So who is available and when. They will click on that, and then they've requested that slot. Any one of our therapists can pick up and confirm it. And as soon as they've confirmed it, the patient will receive an email to say that it's secured. We've also embedded within the system the PHQ-9 and the GAD-7 questionnaires. We've set those as mandatory, and because it's our system when we've built it, we can upload whatever questionnaires we want on there. Now, when I say mandatory, it's mandatory to the system, so it will send those questionnaires out to each and every mental health patient we have. It does give the option to patients to skip through it. So they can skip through it, or they can complete it. And they will get a reminder an hour before their therapy session that they've got these surveys to fill in. And they learn very, very quickly, our patients, because the second time they have an appointment, if they didn't fill it in the first time, they realise that if they don't do it, then the therapist will do it with them at the beginning of their next session. And that's actually eating away at their quality time with their therapist. So it generally doesn't happen a second time, but you never know. So who is it appropriate for? Well, if you can't get to the clinic, if somebody's got problems with travel and mobility, work commitments, childcare issues, do they have basic computer skills, access to the internet, and do they prefer using a computer? Some of the younger generation are certainly ticking those boxes because that is the way that they communicate, and that is how we need to start communicating. Who is it not appropriate? As I touched on earlier, if they've got difficulties reading and writing, then they might not choose the chat element where they would need to type. If the individual prefers another option, this is a choice. We've added it to our menu of options. What we won't do and what we don't do is force it down a patient's neck. So if they still, after we've deemed them as appropriate, if the patient still wishes to receive their consultation in a physical face-to-face proximity, that's absolutely fine. What we won't do is say, no, you can't have your therapy if you don't have it like this. So when I mentioned earlier around the clinical assessment and whether it's the clinician making the decision, that's looking around severe symptoms, risky behaviour, borderline personality disorder. There is currently no translation tools, so there may be a language barrier. However, what we've learned quite recently as well is that although an individual might not be able to speak English, there's a high possibility that they can type and they can read in English. And again, I found this out very, very recently, that if an individual who is living in a non-English speaking country wants a computer, unless they're prepared to pay a higher amount for that computer in their native tongue, the chances are it's going to be an English alphabet. So we've had great examples of where people have not been able to speak English, but they've had their therapy through the chat, the instant chat, and that's been very, very productive. So how does an individual refer into our service? It's just the same as it's always been. So they can self-refer or they can come through the GP. And within that clinical consultation, we will assess suitability and look at the things that I've mentioned earlier. So they will log on to the talkingsense.org and choose an appointment that's convenient. And how would we work with the patient? Well, we could either, like I say, use the chat, audio, video, and use the same methods we would do in a face-to-face meeting. So when we've got self-help materials, we've uploaded those onto our front-end website. We're having talking leaflets being done as we speak, and that will evolve. We're also going to be putting videos on there to help with phobias, etc. And so we don't want to limit the ability that it has. So the benefits to patients is that it's a convenient access to therapy at the click of a mouse. From anywhere they can access a computer. What we've also done is, this has allowed us to forge new links with community settings. So for example, a lot of our libraries in our community are wanting to forge links for various reasons, and they are making this room available for us to put a PC in there. It doesn't always have to be soundproof. If it's not soundproof, then it means that they can take the chat element, because unless somebody is physically standing over their shoulder, nobody's going to know what you're typing. But obviously, if they choose a face-to-face, then that's when they will need to have a confidential space. So we're increasing access to psychological therapies with long-term conditions and with children, and also reducing waiting times, because what we're already showing is that the number of sessions, certainly on the chat element, is reducing. We're showing that there is an improvement in staff productivity, because they're not spending half of their life in a car travelling around the borough getting to various GP practices or community settings. So from an organisational point of view, it's great. The benefits to the patient is that they can access it anywhere. And as I said, the organisational benefits, we've been able to increase our recruitment potential, because in some of our areas we're saturating the market when it comes to skilled professionals within this industry. The e-clinic allows us to potentially push out national adverts, because it means that, in theory, I could have a staff member sat in London providing therapy to one of our patients in Yorkshire, in theory. We're looking to reduce staff travel costs, and we're increasing job satisfaction, because what it's also done as the e-clinic from our trust point of view, it's forced the home working policy. So it means that from a trust point of view, we didn't have one before, now we've got one, and that means that staff are able to choose when they would like their therapy. It's forcing us as an organisation to look at out-of-hours appointments. And I heard somebody present quite recently, and a recent study has taken place around when patients want their appointments. And they want them on a Thursday or a Friday night or a Saturday and Sunday. What they don't want is, hey, will we actually provide therapy? which is Monday to Friday, 9-5. So allowing the e-clinic into our service model allows us to be able to do things slightly differently. So some of the research, it's very, very early days when it comes to the use of telecare as such within the mental health arena. A lot of our guidance was used from established services in America, and we're actually working with the British Association of Counsellors and Psychotherapists as expert references on the development of guidance within the UK. So if anybody wants any details, obviously there's going to be on the slides there. So we've had some great examples of when the e-clinic has done what we want it to do. So we've had examples of where patients have phoned up to cancel appointments because they can't make it for various reasons, childcare or work commitments. Because not all of our patients are out of work. The bulk of our patients are actually in work and struggling on, and they quite like the therapy to fit around their lifestyle. And for many, many years, we have been of the opinion that a patient should fit in with what we want to do. And now we need to flip that on its head. So we've had great examples where we've had cancellations coming through, we've offered the e-clinic, and they've been able to have their appointment on their lunch hour at work. This is what it's all about, this is what we've made the e-clinic for. Talked about the languages, we've had other many great examples of where the e-clinic has basically proven its worth. And I think, as I mentioned very early on, the most important point to mention is that although we developed this around mental health, it can be used in any arena at all. So, for example, we have a number of GP leads on our steering group, and they're basically saying to us, we could use this. We could use this in the management of long-term conditions. We're actually using the e-clinic to form the backbone of a pilot around medically unexplained symptoms, and the findings we will be evaluating in March of next year. Because although MUS and long-term conditions there's a lot of pathfinder science, technology has not been playing a larger part in that, but we're actually forcing that. So we're developing a children's e-clinic. So that was very exciting. Some stats I heard was one in every 6 children under the age of 7 can tie their own shoelaces. However, 4 in every 6 children under the age of 7 can operate a smartphone. And I think of my 2 children, they do PowerPoint presentations and they're all singing and all dancing. And we need to move with the times. So from our point of view, we're using it with health visitors, we're using it with our stop smoking services and our children's services, which is very, very exciting to us. One thing that I did want to mention is some of the challenges. The challenges of implementing anything new in any organisation, particularly, dare I say, within the NHS, is people have done things the same for such a long time. And eventually, when clinicians particularly see the e-clinic, they come on board to the bandwagon. But initially, they did have serious reservations, but not anymore. And we're proving each and every day that the e-clinic is used, certainly within our organisation, that we've moved with the times, and that ultimately we're making it psychological therapies. And the buzzword is IAT, improving access to psychological therapies. Well, what's more accessible than making therapy available in your own home? My name is Michelle Larkin from Doncaster. Thank you very much indeed for your time.
Great, thank you very much. Yeah, definitely worth waiting for. I can see the application. I can see a lot of benefits in this. you mentioned for children and the younger ages, so I mean, it certainly will be a good target audience, no doubt. Any questions? Anybody else doing this? You think you're the only NHS clinic? You may not be. Or anybody thinking of applying this sort of thing in your services?
I've stunned everyone.
Yeah, while we're getting the microphone, what's the scale? How much is it being used at the moment?
We started the rollout in July of this year, and we're using it in 25% of our mental health psychological therapy services, and we've got an aggressive growth pattern around the training and the implementation. So we're making individuals champions of the e-clinic, and they can literally move as fast or as slow as they want to embed it within their service models.
Yeah, and an unfair question to ask you after you consider those questions. Does it require somebody like you coming from marketing business to be able to push this sort of thing forward? But hold that for a moment, or could you envision it to be a widespread across public service? But your question.
Yeah, a couple of things. I don't know if you can disclose the sort of start-up costs that are involved.
I think there was a level of investment from the trust, but it was minuscule. Because if I briefly explain, our trust has a large IT department. We already provide and build websites for a number of other NHS and private sector organisations, so we knew we had the skill set to be able to do it. I think the biggest investment from our point of view has been the resource that's been required to build this and embed. It's not really been the financial input.
The other thing I was going to say, I think in West London Mental Health Trust, of which I'm an employee, I think recently the level of digital attendance is of some concern. So I think this is something that I'll be taking back to my trust to highlight and to get those numbers down as an alternative way of people interact with services.
What we've actually done around DNAs is that, and we learned it very quickly in the pilot, is we changed the system, and because it's our system, we have the flexibility to be able to do it very, very quickly. Is that we've limited the patient ability to book more than one appointment, so they can't. Because what we found in the pilot is that they would book every Monday afternoon at 2 o'clock and just not show up. So they're allowed to book one appointment, have that appointment, and then any subsequent appointments are done directly between the patient and the staff member, and the staff member will book it directly onto the system. So it helps us enormously with DNAs. But it is a commercial product. It is a license. We've built this, and if any organisation, whether it's public sector or private sector, wants to look at utilising it, we do it on a one-user basis, and it's very, very low cost.
Yeah, also, let's say briefly, I can see how this could be a benefit for people who suffer from agoraphobia.
Absolutely.
A lot of people I know, service users, do not like travelling on public transport to get to venues, and even locally often.
Absolutely.
So that would be a great alternative. I'd certainly like to see this in my trust in the future, linked with our recovery hub that we launched this spring. Something that I'll take back to the peer support group.
To put it into perspective, I think regionally, certainly in Yorkshire and Humber, there is a huge amount of appetite for the rollout of our e-clinic within all services. So I think to partly answer one of your questions, Sean, which was around whether it would take somebody like me, no, it wouldn't. This is a clinically led project. Okay, they need somebody like me to look at it from a business point of view, from a commercial point of view, but when it comes to actually using it, it's our staff and it's therapists, clinicians alike that embed this within service model. So from an organisational point of view, it's whether you want to add something extra to your service model.
Great, thank you very much. Final question from Nicola. Well, was there any last questions? Yeah, so we'll take two. In fact, we'll take two together. Nicola first.
So, It's Nicola again. I actually just wanted to make a comment. I have bipolar disorder, and I think this is absolutely fantastic because
Thank you.
when I start to become ill, it is very difficult to verbalise how I'm feeling because the level of emotion that arises when you try and do that is so overwhelming that it's not only impossible. And also, when I'm well, I don't want to go out the door. There's the stress of actually taking a step outside the door, it is overwhelming. But what you will find, what I found, and I do a lot of work with Bipolar UK as well, is that people will happily chat on the electronic forums, explaining their symptoms, talking about their suicidal feelings, because that emotional connection between typing and what you're feeling, is not so overwhelming. I don't know whether you understand what I'm trying to say.
I do. We found it in that if we do a comparison with the chat element to the web-based face-to-face, there's the content of the chat is much more succinct. It's 20% of any conversation is fluff words. And if you're typing, writing, you're thinking about what you're actually putting in. From your point of view, it would make things so much easier for you.
It's more of a question, it's more of an observation. We're a charity, and I wondered how our commissioners who commission our service would feel about us using this type of service, because we wouldn't be providing the traditional face-to-face service to the...
We had the same challenges initially because this is about version 5. And initially, all we had was the chat bit. We also had some issues around the model within some of our boroughs that we cover as far as GPs didn't like telephone consultations. But what we found by engaging our GP leads and all of our commissioners, they've seen this service, this product evolve. So from a commissioner point of view, they are in full support of this, because what we're also able to do is improve productivity. If we improve productivity, we're reducing waiting times, and we're not asking for any more money to do it. So from a commission point of view, I can't speak for them all, but certainly ours are very, very supportive of it. But if you want any more details, I think you've got our details anyway.
Yeah, the commissioning does really, really vary. We've got a GP working for us who would absolutely love this sort of thing, and he'd embrace it, and he'd convince his clinical commissioning group that this would be the way forward. He'd see the benefits of it immediately. So, it's part of your role is marketing, and these things need a bit of selling, and they need to explain exactly what the benefits are, and then we'll catch on.
Yes,
we will eventually. We usually do. 20% of conversations include fluff words. My daughter thinks that my conversations include 80% of fluff words. So I've got some work to do. To keep fluff words down, though, that's fantastic. Thank you very much for that. That's our presentation.